My name is Diana Whitfield Cross. I am 52 years old. I live in Charlotte, North Carolina, in a house I designed and paid for with money I earned. I spent 18 years as a corporate attorney before I left the firm to build something of my own, a licensing and compliance consultancy that my husband called, more than once, my little side project. Raymond and I met in our late 20s at a fundraiser. He was charming in the way men are charming when they want something from you. We married at 27 and built 25 years together, or what I thought was together, in a house in Dilworth with a garden he never touched, and a marriage he stopped tending sometime around year 18. I am telling you this so you understand what I walked into that restaurant already carrying. If you are watching this from somewhere in the South, from Charlotte, Atlanta, Memphis, Houston, leave your city in the comments. I want to know who's out here with me tonight. And if you have ever sat across a table from someone who underestimated you so completely they handed you a weapon thinking it was a wound, subscribe, because this story is for you. I need you to understand that nothing about what happened next was luck. It was not coincidence that the right contract existed at the right company. It was not fate that my attorney had the Aldenmere files indexed and ready. And it was not accident that Raymond's legal team had not done the due diligence that would have caught it. It was planning. It was 3 years of planning conducted in the early morning hours, while a man who lived in my house had decided I was scenery. Before I tell you what Margaret found when she pulled that file, and what Raymond's attorney said when she read him the number, I need you to sit with this for just a moment. Because the question this story answers is not what did she do when he served her papers. The question is, what do you do with the years before? Raymond Cross was the kind of man who organized the world by what it reflected back at him. If you were useful to his image, you were valued. If you complicated it, you were managed. And for the first 15 years of our marriage, I was useful. I was the wife who understood contracts and made brilliant small talk at his company dinners and looked, he once told me, like someone who belongs in the room. He meant it as a compliment. I filed it away. The first time I felt the shift, we were at a dinner party in Myers Park. The kind of dinner party where everyone knows exactly how much everyone else's house costs. A partner at Raymond's firm asked me what I was working on. I told him I had just advised a mid-size medical device company through an IP licensing restructure that saved them $2 million in the first fiscal year. Raymond laughed. Not at the number. At me. Diana consults a little, he said, cutting into his steak. Keeps her busy. The partner looked at me. I smiled and changed the subject. That was the laugh. The same laugh he used when I mentioned hiring a second associate. Don't you think you're getting ahead of yourself? The same laugh when I said the name of one of my clients, and he said he'd never heard of them, as if that was a relevant metric. The same laugh, same breath, same dismissal, 3 times over 4 years, until it wasn't even a laugh anymore. It was just the way he exhaled when I spoke about work. He had decided what my business was. He had decided what I was. I let him. Not because I was afraid of him, and not because I believed him. I let him because there is a particular kind of peace in being underestimated by someone who shares your address. They stop watching you. They stop asking questions. They assume the answer is small, and so they never look at the size of what you are building. The house in Dilworth was bought with both our names on the deed, but only one person's eye for what it needed. I chose the lot for the light. I chose the contractor. I drove every weekend to the supplier in Kannapolis for the stone pavers I wanted in the garden, because Raymond said it didn't matter, and I knew it did. When the house was finished, Raymond's colleagues called it beautiful, and Raymond said, Diana has an eye for these things, the way you might say someone has an eye for window arrangements, pleasantly. As if talent applied to domestic spaces is a warm but ultimately ornamental gift. I thought about that. Later, I thought about how many things he had categorized as Diana's gift for this or Diana's knack for that, things that were in fact strategies, negotiations, returns on careful investment. The garden was not a hobby, it was a skill. The same skill I applied to the Aldenmere client list, patient cultivation, the right conditions, knowing when to prune and when to wait. He never once asked who I had lunch with. He never asked who referred new clients. He never asked what I charged, what the margin was, what the growth trajectory looked like. He had filed me under fine and moved on to the next thing requiring his attention. The small humiliations were not dramatic. I want to be accurate about this, because the word humiliation implies a spectacle, and Raymond was too careful for spectacles. What he did was smaller, quieter, sustained. At our daughter Imani's college graduation dinner, He told a story about how she got her work ethic from him. He told it to the table. She looked at me, and I looked at her, and we had an entire conversation in that look that lasted half a second and said everything. At his company's holiday party 2 years ago, someone asked him how long I had been running my practice. He said, "Oh, a couple years. It keeps her engaged." I was sitting next to him. I had been running the practice for 3 years at that point. I had billed $1 million the previous fiscal year. I was sitting next to my husband while he described my business as a mechanism for keeping me occupied. I smiled. I asked the colleague about his kids. On the drive home I said, "You could have asked me how long." He said, "I didn't want to make it a whole thing." That was the moment, I think. Not the affair. Not the dinner. That sentence. My career was a thing he was managing the size of. My professional life was an item on the agenda he was trying to move past efficiently. I said, "Okay," and then I went home and I sent an email to Crestfield Logistics Compliance Director, following up on a referral introduction I had gotten at a conference in Raleigh, and 3 weeks later I had the meeting that became the biggest contract Aldenmuir had ever signed. In year 22, Raymond started working late on Thursdays. I noticed. I did not mention it. I had learned, over 2 decades, that Raymond told you exactly what you needed to know in his own time, and that pressing him before he was ready produced a version of the truth curated specifically for your consumption. So, I waited. I kept working. My firm had grown to 3 associates and a paralegal. We had moved out of the spare bedroom and into a proper office suite off South Tryon. I had incorporated, quietly, under a holding company name, Aldenmuir Advisory Group, LLC, because I had watched enough clients fail to protect their assets in marital situations that I was not about to be one of them. Raymond did not know the name of my company. He knew Diana's consulting thing. He knew it paid for the kitchen renovation and our daughter's semester abroad. He knew it in the way you know a river is nearby, because the air smells different, present, but not examined. In year 23, I found out about Thursdays. I am not going to give her namespace in this story. She does not deserve it, and neither does Raymond's version of what she meant. What I will tell you is that it had been going on for 14 months, and that when I found out, not through confrontation, but through a document that crossed my desk in the most ordinary professional way, I sat in my office for 45 minutes with the door closed, and then I called my attorney, Margaret, not to file anything. Just to ask a question. "Margaret," I said, "if I were a client, and my husband had been having an affair for over a year, what would you tell me to do right now?" She told me. I did not do it right then. I went home. I made dinner. I sat across from Raymond and watched him tell me about his day. And I thought about the way he had laughed at the Myers Park dinner table. And I thought about the licensing agreement I had signed with Crestfield Logistics 18 months earlier. Crestfield Logistics, Raymond's company. He had never mentioned it to me, because he did not know. The contracting division had gone through procurement had gone through legal had vetted and signed, and the name Aldenmuir Advisory Group, LLC, had meant nothing to anyone except the compliance officer who renewed the agreement annually. I gave myself the week after I found out about Thursdays to feel whatever needed to be felt. I cried on a Tuesday, which surprised me, not because I was sad he had done it, but because I was sad that I wasn't more sad. 25 years, and the grief fit inside a Tuesday afternoon. On Wednesday I called Margaret. On Thursday I filed the Aldenmuir incorporation papers I had been holding for 6 months. I ate my dinner that night. I said, "How was your day, Raymond?" He said, "Long, good though." I nodded. And I started planning. Our 25th anniversary fell on a Thursday. I noticed that too. Raymond made the reservation at Lumiere, the restaurant in uptown Charlotte, where he had proposed to me in 2001. He told me to wear something nice. He told me he had a surprise. He was more attentive in the weeks leading up to it than he had been in years, touching my shoulder when he passed me in the kitchen, asking about my day with what sounded like actual interest. I thought I might be wrong about what was coming. I wore a burgundy dress. I had my hair done. I drove myself because Raymond said he had to come from a meeting and would meet me there. When I arrived, the hostess took me to a private dining room I had not expected. There was a table set for 2 with candles and a champagne bucket. And at the other end of the room, near the bar, were 4 of Raymond's colleagues. His director, 2 regional VPs, and the woman I had seen in the document. She was not there as his date. She was there as a witness. I understood in that moment, with the particular clarity that only comes when a thing you have been quietly preparing for finally arrives, that Raymond had arranged this. The colleagues were not coincidence. The private room was not romance. He had staged a humiliation with an audience because he believed, genuinely believed, that I would fall apart. He did not know me as well as he thought. Raymond came in 4 minutes later, kissed me on the cheek, held my chair. We sat. He ordered the champagne. He made small talk. He waited until the glasses were poured and the colleagues had drifted close enough to hear, and then he reached inside his jacket and placed a sealed envelope on the table. "Diana," he said, "I think we both know this has run its course." The envelope had my name on it in printed letters. I did not open it. I knew what it was. I picked it up, turned it over, set it down. "Are you sure?" I said. "I am," he said. I had Marcus draw them up. Very straightforward. Marcus was his personal attorney. I had met Marcus at 3 company dinners and found him adequate. I opened the envelope. I read the first page. The filing was clean. The terms were exactly what I expected. He wanted the house, my retirement accounts, and a declaration that my business assets were separate from the marital estate, which told me exactly how little he understood about what I had built and what it was worth. He slid the pen across the table. His Mont Blanc. His mother's pen. I picked it up. I signed. All 4 pages. Initialed where marked. Set the pen down gently next to my champagne glass. "Thank you," I said. Raymond blinked. He had expected tears. He had arranged this room for tears. What Raymond had not anticipated, what the entire staging of that evening could not account for, was that I had sat across from difficult men at difficult tables for 30 years of professional life. I had been in rooms where people expected me to waver. I had been handed documents designed to dismantle my position, and I had read them with my face arranged into something calm, and continued the meeting. I was a corporate attorney for 18 years. I know what it looks like when someone hands you a document and waits for your reaction. I know how to give them nothing. The colleague near the bar, his director, a man named Patrick, who had shaken my hand at 3 company dinners, made a move as if to intercept me as I crossed the room. I do not know what he planned to say. I stopped walking, turned to face him, and said, "Lovely to see you, Patrick. Give my best to your wife." He stopped moving. I walked through the door. In the parking lot. The Charlotte night was warm and still smelled like the jasmine they planted along the restaurant entrance every spring. I stood next to my car for a moment and let the air be air. People ask me sometimes whether I was angry, whether I cried in the parking lot, whether there was a moment where the composure broke. There was not. Not because I didn't feel anything. I felt the 25 years the way you feel a long flight when you finally land, not in your chest, but in your legs. The weight of duration. The specific exhaustion of arriving somewhere you didn't choose. But anger? No, anger would have been a waste of the moment. I stood next to my car and looked at the skyline, and then I called Margaret. She answered on the second ring. I said. He filed. She said, "When?" "Tonight, anniversary dinner. I already signed." There was a pause. Then Margaret said, "Diana, are you all right?" "I'm fine," I said. "I need you to do something for me first thing tomorrow morning. I need you to pull the Crestfield Logistics contract from the Aldenmere file and look at the renewal date." She pulled it up from home within the hour. The contract between Aldenmere Advisory Group, LLC, and Crestfield Logistics was an ongoing compliance advisory agreement, automatically renewing annually, representing 14% of Crestfield's compliance budget. It had been in place for 18 months. The value over the life of the 3-year initial term was $840,000. And it carried a continuity clause, meaning that any dissolution, sale, or material change in the structure of Aldenmere required 60 days' notice and renegotiation. Raymond's company had signed a contract with my company. His legal team had vetted my company. His procurement department had renewed my company's contract 9 months ago. And if he proceeded with divorce proceedings under the terms he had filed, which declared my business assets separate from the marital estate, without having done a single day of due diligence on what those assets were, he was walking into a courtroom with a document that undermined his own legal position in 3 separate ways. What most people don't understand about building something quietly is that the quiet is not absence. It is attention without interference. It is the condition under which real work gets done. Every morning for 3 years, I was at my desk by 6:30, before Raymond's alarm, before the coffee, before the house made its first sounds of the day. I answered emails from clients in 3 time zones. I built a referral network that ran through corporate compliance officers, who talked to each other at conferences Raymond had never heard of. I gave talks. I wrote a column for a regional business publication under my maiden name, Whitfield. Because I had learned, from 25 years of watching men make decisions, that the name people take seriously is the one they encounter first. Raymond had never Googled me. I know because his assistant had, once, 2 years ago, when she was vetting attendees for a company retreat, and my name came up as a potential speaker. She found the column. She found the firm. She brought it to Raymond's desk, and he told her, according to someone who was in the room, "That's my wife. She just consults locally." She moved on. He moved on. I added 2 clients that quarter. The valuation I commissioned was not for vanity. It was because I had been approached about a partial acquisition, a larger advisory group in Raleigh that wanted to absorb our compliance practice into their national network. I was not interested in selling. But I needed the number. I needed to know what I was worth in the language of a room I might one day have to stand in. $4.2 million. I read the report in my office, and then I set it in the Aldenmere file, and went home and made dinner and asked Raymond about his day. He said, "Fine, long." I said, "Mine too." Here is what Raymond had told people, I later learned, at those same company dinners, where I smiled and redirected conversations. He had told colleagues that Diana does some consulting, that she helps small companies with contracts, that it keeps her sharp, as if I were a kitchen knife he was maintaining. Meanwhile, Aldenmere's compliance work for Crestfield had become, per their own internal review, one of the most cost-efficient vendor relationships in their Mid-Atlantic division. There is something I want you to understand about the years I spent being quiet. I was not hiding because I was afraid. I was not silent because I was small. I was building in the way that women in this particular chapter of their lives learn to build, without announcement, without permission, without waiting for someone to tell them the room was ready. You lay the foundation before anyone is watching, because the people who are watching will find a way to complicate the construction. Raymond had been given 25 years of proximity to what I was capable of. He used it to hand me a pen. Margaret called me back the next morning. She said, "Diana, you know what his attorney is going to say when he finds out." "I know," I said. "Are you prepared for this to get complicated?" I looked at the Aldenmere files stacked on my desk. The Crestfield contract. The valuation. The 3 subsequent client agreements I had landed in the last 18 months, 2 of them referrals from Crestfield's own compliance officer. "Margaret," I said, "I have been preparing for this for 3 years." Marcus called my attorney 12 days after the filing. He called at 9 a.m., which told me Raymond had not slept well. I was not in that call. Margaret handled it. But she told me afterward that Marcus opened by saying the filing was straightforward, and he hoped we could keep things amicable. Margaret said, "We would love that. Before we discuss terms, I need to ask you something." Marcus said, "Of course." She said, "Are you aware that Crestfield Logistics is a current client of Aldenmere Advisory Group, LLC, which is your client's wife's company, under a compliance advisory contract that represents 14% of Crestfield's annual compliance budget?" There was a silence. "I'm going to need to call you back," Marcus said. He called back in 4 hours. The conversation that followed lasted 48 minutes, and involved Marcus placing her on hold 3 separate times. Raymond had not told Marcus about Crestfield. Raymond had not told anyone about Crestfield because Raymond did not know about Crestfield. Because Raymond had decided, years ago, that Diana's consulting thing was small, and small things do not require investigation. The filing was withdrawn 6 days later. Not because Raymond wanted to stay married. That ship had long sailed. It was withdrawn because the terms he had proposed were no longer operable. You cannot declare business assets separate from the marital estate when those assets include a contract with your own employer that your own legal team approved. The mediation was 3 sessions over 6 weeks. Raymond came to the first session looking like a man who had spent a month being educated on something he should have known. He had a new attorney, not Marcus, who had apparently declined to continue. They were good. They were thorough. They had finally done their due diligence. What they found was exactly what I had built. A $4.2 million advisory firm with a 3-year performance record. A blue-chip client list that included a Fortune 500 logistics company their own clients' division relied on. And an asset protection structure Margaret had spent 18 months making bulletproof. Raymond spoke once, in the second session. He said, "I didn't know." His attorney put a hand on his arm. That was the only time Raymond said anything that was not directed through counsel. We settled 8 weeks after the filing was withdrawn. I kept the house. I kept Aldenmere. I kept the retirement accounts Raymond had decided I would give up without a fight. The Crestfield contract renewed on schedule 3 months after the settlement was finalized. Aldenmuir's compliance division had performed. And performance, unlike marriage, is documented. As I stood to leave the final session, Raymond said, "Diana, you could have told me." I looked at him for a moment. "I want to tell you something about being underestimated. Because I think some of you know exactly what I am talking about. It is not always violent. It does not always arrive as cruelty. Sometimes it arrives as a laugh at a dinner table. Sometimes it is someone describing your life's work as something that keeps you busy. Sometimes it is 25 years of someone standing close enough to see your blueprint and choosing to look at the ceiling instead. And you have a choice in that moment. You can correct them. You can prove yourself loudly. In real time, in every room. You can spend your energy fighting the perception. Or, you can build. You can be so quiet and so deliberate and so focused that by the time they go looking for what you are worth, they find something they did not budget for. I do not tell you this to glorify the divorce, or to make Raymond into a villain who deserves no grace. He is a complicated man who made choices I will not make excuses for. But I also will not pretend that the 25 years were without love. Because they were not. They were just not enough. And somewhere in the middle of not enough, I found my enough. Aldenmuir is still growing. I hired my 4th associate last spring. We moved into a larger office suite, this time in a building I own. Imani helped me move the last of my things on a Saturday in October. When we were finished, she made us both tea, and we sat in the new apartment and she said, "Mom, did you know all along how it would go?" I thought about the Mont Blanc pen, the champagne glasses, the parking lot. I said, "I knew enough." She nodded. She has Raymond's jawline and my patience, which is the best possible combination. I sat in that garden in Dilworth, the one I designed and planted and tended for 20 years. And I watched the morning come through the windows of the house I was keeping. And I thought, the pen he handed me to sign his papers was his mother's. I held it for 30 seconds,